An overview of Payment of Wages Act and Minimum Wages Act. Payment of Wages Act studied under four components: scope, specifying purpose, wages and employer; time of payment, amendment of 2017; deductions, authorized deductions and fines; regarding claims, procedure for claims, appeals, etc. Payment of Wages Act covers persons employed in any factory under the Factories Act, and it will also cover those who are in industrial establishments as notified by state government, and the salary limit is up to 24,000 for coverage under Payment of Wages Act, and the purpose is twofold. Wages payable are to be disbursed within the periods prescribed, and there should be no unauthorized deductions from the amount due to an employee. Wages is in respect of work done under a contract as a remuneration payable to an employee on fulfillment of terms of contract. It includes components like HRA, award and settlement, overtime, leave salary, holiday, bonus, and any other entitlements available under any scheme per law in force, but it doesn't include value of accommodation, reimbursement of expenses, travelling allowance, and gratuity. Employer is the key person responsible under the Act, and it includes manager of factory under Factories Act or any other person who is responsible to the owner for supervision or control of employees. The employer is responsible for payment of all wages payable under the Act, and he shall fix the period in respect of which wages shall be paid, and the requirement is no wage period shall exceed 1 month. It can be a day, be a week, be a fortnight, or a month. The number of persons employed decides the time of payment. If the number of employed is less than 1,000, payment due before expiry of 7th day after the last wage period. Otherwise, it is before expiry of the 10th day after the last wage period. In case of termination, payment to be made before expiry of 2nd working day. All payments required to be made on a working day. Government has got the discretion to give exemption by a special order. Originally, to protect interests of employees, the Act of 1936 insisted on all payments to be made in coin or currency, and any bank remittance was to be authorized by written permission from the employee. But after demonetization and the amendment of 2017 to support digital payments, now the employer can remit the money by check or by transferring to bank account without even the written authorization from the employee. Any reduction from wages is restricted to authorized deductions. In respect of fines for absence of duty, damage attributed to neglect, housing or amenities supplied by employer, or any loan given, advance given, overpaid wages, or income tax remitted on behalf of the employee can be deducted. Insurance premium deductible when authorized by employee in writing. Fines are subject to protective restrictions. Fines for damage or loss cost shall be explained to employee, and he shall be heard, and they shall be recorded in a register and intimated to the employee in detail. In a wage period, they cannot exceed 50% of wages, balance to be carried forward. For an employee under the age of 15, there can be no fine, and in a month or in a wage period, deduction for fine cannot exceed 3%, and any fine imposed has to be recovered within 90 days of imposition. Act provides for well-set claims procedure, application to be made within 12 months from the date of non-payment or wrong deductions. It can be made by the employee or his legal practitioner or the office of registered trade union, and it is made to a labor commissioner or other officer appointed by the appropriate government, and the authority shall hold inquiry and direct payment with penalty wherever required, and it has got the recovery rights of a magistrate. If the authority is satisfied that the delay is due to bona fide circumstances, it may not grant any compensation. A party aggrieved at the decision of the appropriate authority can file an appeal within 30 days to a court of small causes or to a district court. But before filing appeal, the amount appealed against has to be deposited, and an employer is required to display prominent clauses of the Act in locations within the factory in a language understood by majority of workers. And no court shall entertain any suit if there is an application for negotiation pending with the relevant authority. and contracting out is forbidden under the Act, and as such, any compromise resulting in employee relinquishing his claim is null and void. Minimum Wages Act and its components: living wage, forced labor, employment, schedule, employee, minimum rate, working hours, fixation procedure, and revision. Minimum Wages Act considers minimum wage as the living wage which guarantees subsistence and preserves efficiency. It is income enough for basic standard of living of health, dignity, comfort and education. It seeks to protect unorganized labor who are deprived of living wages. As held in Asiad workers case, paying less than minimum wage is an offence. Article 23 says beggar and other similar forms of forced labor are prohibited and are punishable. Where in an employment, wages as compared to similar types of labor in other industries is considered low, the appropriate government takes it up and fixes minimum rates. And such employments are specified in the schedule to the Minimum Wages Act under Part 1 and Part 2. Part 1 deals with non-agricultural employments and Part 2 deals with agricultural employments. Agriculture includes farming, dairy farming, raising of livestock, beekeeping, poultry and other incidental practices. The Act gives a comprehensive and supportive definition of employee as any person who is employed for hire or reward to do work, skilled or unskilled, manual or clerical, in respect of which minimum wages have been fixed by the government, and it includes an outworker where the process is carried out at the home of the outworker or at a place not under his control. While fixing minimum rate, the government ensures that there is a minimum of 1000 employees in an employment category, and it may fix a minimum time rate, minimum piece rate or an overtime rate. It may fix different rates for adults, adolescents, children and apprentices. And different rates may be fixed for different scheduled employments or within an employment for different classes, or a different rate for a different locality. And the wage period that is considered may be by the hour, by the day, by the month, or such other larger wage period as the government may consider necessary. Ceiling on working hours: for adults 9 hours a day, inclusive of rest interval. It can spread up to not more than 12 hours on any day. In case of children, it is 4.5 hours a day at the maximum. One has to work for a continuous period of not less than 6 days for a weekly leave, a day of rest for every period of 7 days, and normally day of rest will be Sunday. If a person works for more than 9 hours a day or 48 hours a week, he is eligible for overtime, and the overtime rates will be for agriculture at 1.5 times the normal average wage, and in case of others it is at double the normal rate. The task of fixing and revising minimum wage is entrusted to a committee or subcommittee which will hold inquiries and then advise the government. The government will form a draft proposal and notify in the official gazette, inviting objections from those affected, and it gives a period of 2 months for the same, and on expiry of 3 months of notification, after incorporating accepted changes, the scheme will be implemented, and the government is required to review minimum wages at regular intervals not exceeding 5 years, and till the review takes place, the existing rates continue. Progress review. Payment of Wages Act applies where the wages per person does not exceed 24,000 per month. Wage period shall not exceed 1 month. The term employer includes his legal representatives, and employed person includes legal representatives of the deceased employee person. Payment of wages has to be made on a working day. It can be made by check or credit to bank account. Wages are being paid for employed persons, and the number of persons employed is less than 1,000 within 7 days of the completion of wage period, where more than 1,000 it has to be paid before 10th day after the wage period. Where a person is terminated, his settlement has to be made before second working day. Where there is a delay in payment, an application could be filed against it and the period is up to 12 months from the day when the payment is due. The claim for delayed payment or deduction made. There can be a delay in the payment. Number two, there can be some unauthorized deductions made in the payment. In both cases, we can use Form A and file the complaint within 12 months. After we file the claim, if there is a decision by the appropriate authority and we want to appeal against it, we can file the appeal on the order of the authority within 30 days of it, and the appeal could be filed in a district court. The Act talks of deductions which are authorized. If there is a deduction, it has to be authorized under the Act, and no deduction shall be made other than authorized. And if the employee's age is under 15 years, there can be no deduction under the head fine. It has to be nil. The Act authorizes imposing of fines, but there is a procedure for imposing fine. There is a notice, inquiry, and hearing the employee before the fine is imposed. Whenever a fine is imposed, it has got an expiry period. It has to be recovered within 90 days. Even when it is recovered within 90 days, it cannot be recovered in installments. It has to be recovered in a lot. And there is a restriction on the extent of fine. Fine in any month cannot exceed 3% of these wages payable to him in respect of every wage period. And there is a register kept showing all deductions and realizations, and it is open for inspection, and it will be maintained by the responsible person, and the register and record is preserved for at least 3 years after the date of last entry. The progress in respect of Minimum Wages Act. The Act has a schedule, and that schedule is divided into two parts, Part 1 and Part 2. Part 1 is dedicated to non-agricultural sector with 18 entries, and Part 2 takes care of employment in agriculture. When the government fixes the minimum rate, it can be a time rate, it can be a piece rate, or it can be a combination of the two, guaranteed time rate. The fixation takes care of the cost of living index while fixing the minimum rate of wages. It can make also some exceptions in case of specific categories, like any wages payable to a disabled person need not have to strictly follow minimum wages. It may be slightly different, but it has to be approved by the appropriate government. Where a person is falling under any of these parts and the remuneration fixed or remuneration paid is less than the minimum wage, it is an offense of forced labor which is prohibited under our constitution. When a government or the authority fixes a minimum wage, there are two occasions where they have to wait for certain things. One, where a dispute is pending before the tribunal, one cannot tinker with the minimum rate. Second, when an award is in operation, the existing rate has to continue. The Act defines who is an employer. Employer is any person who is responsible to the owner for the control of the employees. And it is mainly talking of fixing of responsibility for payment of minimum wages with the employer or occupier or any person who is the owner of the enterprise. It talks of adult who has completed 18 years of age, adolescent, a person who is above 14 but below 18. And as we have seen, minimum wage can be fixed by time, that is by hour, day, month, that can be piece rate also, and the normal hours per day is 9 hours. This is used for calculation of overtime hours, anything in excess of 9 hours a day. To get a weekly rest, there should be a continuous period of not less than 6 days, means 6 working days results in creation of a day of rest as a right of the employee. 9 hours per day or 48 hours a week is the normal hours. If an employee works more than that, he will be entitled to overtime, and overtime in case of agriculture or employment in agriculture will be 1.5 times the overtime work, and in case of other employments it will be 2 times. The minimum wage, which is fixed by the government, has to be paid for the wage period, and it has to be paid within 10 days of the end of the wage period where the number of employees is more than 1000 in an establishment. If the establishment has less than 1000 employees, the wage has to be paid within 7 days of the end of the month. When an employer makes deductions out of the monthly wages of a person, there is a restriction on the total amount of deductions. In the normal case, it cannot exceed 50% of the wage payable to a person. Where, however, the payment involves payment to a cooperative society to a major extent, the deduction can be up to 75%. And the minimum wage has to be paid in cash. And a wage slip has to be issued to every employee at least a day prior to disbursement of wages. This is for transparency and making the employee aware how much he has earned and how much is being deducted in advance. The minimum wage as fixed by the appropriate government is normally reviewed. As per the Act, it needs to be reviewed at an interval not exceeding 5 years. Once in 5 years, the government has to have a relook at the wages and refix them based on necessity.